Greetings and thank you for joining us today for this joint webinar between Bureau Veritas Certification and SQF. The title of the webinar is The One Thing You Need to Do Before Your Edition 9 Audit. Today's speakers are myself, Chris Middleton. I am the Food Certification Manager with Bureau Veritas Certification North America. I've been involved with SQF dating back to 2009 and involved in a number of edition changes. So hopefully bringing some experience and some real examples of struggles that I've seen between transitions between editions in the past to the table. Been involved in overseeing not only the certification side within our group, but also the training side within our group on that end to ensure that our clients that are going forward for certification audits are able to meet the expectations and the demands of the rigorous nature of these GFSI and other food certification standards that are out there. Our other presenter today is Tammy Van Buren with SQFI, and she is available, and I will let her introduce herself versus just reading this nice, beautiful blurb that's here. So Tammy, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Chris. So I am the Manager of Compliance with SQFI, and I've been with SQFI since November of 2019, so a good year and a half now. Definitely not the 2020 year that I expected when I started with SQFI. Not sure that any of us expected to have the 2020 that we did, but I'm looking forward to edition 9 in 2021 and the changes that we're bringing to the table. So, one of the things I just want to point out is, I came from an SQF certified sites, actually 2 of them, and was the SQF practitioner. So I'm familiar also with what it takes to go through an edition change and some of the challenges that you have to meet to be able to do that. So I think Chris is going to tell us a little bit about Bureau Veritas, and then we'll jump in.
Thanks, Tammy. Bureau Veritas is a global leader in testing, inspection, and certification. So we are that tick company on that side of things. Our mission is to shape a world of trust by reducing clients' risks, improving their performance, and helping them innovate to meet the challenges of quality, health and safety, environmental protection, and social responsibility. As you can see on the image that's on your screen, there's over 7,400 employees with Bureau Veritas North America. Over the last 20 years, there has been a great expansion of Bureau Veritas within the North American market. As you can see, over 100 acquisitions. That even includes groups within Canada like Maxim Labs and whatnot, which has brought into that testing side of things in the food area. And then there are over 160 offices and laboratories within the 50 states and Canada. As you can see, we do have a very large presence as well within the European and Asian markets. Tammy, I'll let it go for, I'll give you the floor so you could talk about SQF and just the rollout of edition 9.
All right, thank you. For those individuals listening today who may not be familiar with Safe Quality Food Institute, or SQFI, as we're called, I want to share just a little bit about our organization. Our mission is to deliver consistent, globally recognized food safety and quality certification programs based on sound scientific principles applied across all industry sectors and valued by all stakeholders. The network of sites certified to the SQF program extends across the globe with a community of more than 10,000 certified sites in over 40 countries across 6 continents. Thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, all initial and recertification audits conducted beginning May 24th will be to edition 9. The title of this webinar is The One Thing You Need to Do Before Your Edition 9 Audit. What is that one thing, you ask? Well, let's talk internal audits. You may be thinking that there weren't any key changes to internal audit for edition 9. And you know what? You're right. There weren't a lot of key changes. But I do want to cover the highlights of this section and provide you with some interesting statistics. So in summary, we did a little bit of numbering change. We did some consolidation. We reworded much of the code for clarity. The highlights, though, for internal audit, I've got some bullet points here. You got to audit next to an audit checklist or some similar tool. You have to verify compliance and or non-compliance. CAPA, hopefully you know that stands for corrective action and preventative action. That's required when deficiencies are found during your internal audit. You have to communicate those results. Staff have to be trained and they have to be competent and independent of the function audited. Regular site and equipment inspections are required and records are required. So nothing new there as far as the mandatory requirements, but it just such a misunderstood section of the code. So let's talk statistics. All right, so internal audit by the numbers. Total nonconformances in 2020, let's look at those. There were 653 minors and 11 majors written against internal audits. So sites without a nonconformance in internal audit, let's look at their average score. So 95.27, that is almost an excellent score for roughly 7,000 sites that had an audit in 2020. Their average score was almost that 96 to get them an excellent if they didn't have a nonconformance in internal audit. Now, what about those 653 sites that had a minor nonconformance in internal audit? What was their average score? 89.82. So that's a 6-point drop there from those sites that didn't have a nonconformance in internal audit to those that had a minor. You know, a minor's only 1 point, and yet we saw a 6-point drop. So that's pretty significant, I think. Now let's look at those 11 sites that had a major nonconformance in internal audit. Now, a major's worth 10 points, so you know the most they could have is a 90, and yet their average score 64.27, 31 points lower than those sites that did not have a nonconformance in internal audit. I was just blown away by the difference there that one nonconformance could impact throughout the entire audit. Now, Chris is going to take us through some key points of what a strong internal audit program looks like and how you can prepare for Edition 9.
Thanks, Tammy. Yeah, I think it's an extremely important area and an overlooked area that that we have when we do audits. Is the internal audit program. Is we think that it's a simple activity. We just do a checklist. We tick a box and we're done and we move through. And it's just a real small part of the audit. And really, I want to tailor this small point. I know the font's small on the screen, but it's quite important to say that this really does set you up for success. So in those food safety management systems, if you've ever heard me talk, I talk about the three-legged stool that exists sometimes with your HACCP or food safety plan. You've got your management commitment, management review programs and whatnot that are providing those resources. That food safety plan is detailing how you're going to make a safe product. And then your internal audit program is that key verification step that's ensuring that we are meeting what needs to have in place and it is effective. Those outcomes are being met every single time. And it gets overlooked at how important this activity is on that side of things. So as we kind of move forward, let's kind of look forward to see or look at what exactly the internal audit program is for. Already said, it's really to be looking at to see that your programs are effective. Your system is functioning as intended. You are making sure that you are manufacturing safe, and in cases for those sites that are to the quality code, quality products. Remember, safe quality foods, right? We're focusing on that as we go forward. Other thing that this allows you to do in the internal audit programs is you can be very agile. You can make quick changes as needed. This allows you to find a problem, hopefully, before it exacerbates and gets bigger and causes more issues within your system. And then you've got a bigger fix to make, which definitely causes challenges. This also serves as an assurance that you are in compliance prior to your auditor arriving. Remember, that's not the sole reason that we're doing these audits. This is a nice bonus. It's the cherry on the sundae getting that certificate on the wall. The main reason that we are having these audits, the main reason we are having these put in place is the SQF is a system that we're putting in place to ensure that we prevent recalls, withdrawal issues, and safety concerns with products or quality concerns with products. That's what these internal audit programs are going to help you do. And why do we say that it is so important that you revise this, add an addition change? It's because of those changes that can allow you to modify your process to make it even more effective. So before we kind of talk about what you want to look at in those internal audit programs, I just want to kind of impart some of my experience being out there and auditing for a number of years as to what those common errors that I see when I'm coming out there. You've already heard us talk a little bit about a checklist in that. Remember, we are auditing a system. We're not just going down and doing a master sanitation schedule and seeing that things are clean and ticking a box. This is a key activity. The other thing to look at is sometimes you want to make sure that it is your own evaluation of programs and you take ownership of it and be much more rigorous and much more thorough than an external auditor because you have more in-depth knowledge of your programs. So my number one common error that I see is an internal audit program tends to be a once a year activity. It is not spread out over the year. We try and capture this internal audit in 1 or 2 days, and it really does not allow us to do a rigorous, thorough, and robust evaluation of our programs within there. We just say we need to audit our system elements or module 2 and module 11 for the sector specific PRPs for manufacturing, or module 12 for storage and distribution, or 13 or whatnot of what category you're in. We don't really go in and dig deep enough. We do a surface scrape once a year and think that that gives us the assurance that we are doing a good job. That is not necessarily true. So be sure that you look at designing those programs to be a bit more rigorous, a bit more robust, and don't just think that it's only a once a year activity. The other thing that I note is when I look through records talking about the checklist, the box is ticked. So we do not detail how we're doing our evaluation. How do you look at implementation? How are you looking at design? We simply look down sometimes. Do I have a written program? Yes. SOP 123 covers it. Good. We're done. We don't actually go out and see, are we fully evaluating that everything is effective as we're moving forward? We're doing a traceability challenge and we're pulling records that are associated with that traceability challenge to see that the different programs are functioning as needed. We don't start looking at evaluation of those records, and then our records from the internal audit activities don't necessarily detail the evaluation that it was done. So it's really hard to follow the breadcrumbs to see how we got to that conclusion at points. The other thing that we see is really limited involvement of personnel. This gets handed off to the SQF practitioner to oversee potentially, or to some other department, and that's it. That's the only person that does it. We need to make sure the entire facility is involved. Get that senior leadership involved. Get other people involved. Get new eyes into the system. Start getting more people involved. Get line leaders involved. Heck, even get line personnel involved to get some ownership. You're going to see where that might be important as it comes in with Edition 9, as we're talking about the culture of an environment and of a manufacturing or storage and distribution facility. So things to keep an eye on. And I already kind of talked about detail of the process, but we do see challenges with compliance. It's the check mark. Non-conformances tend to be documented fairly well, but the compliance evidence has not been there in the past. How did you get to that decision? That is very, very important because that's going to help you find the problems potentially if they exist, because it shows that you did a thorough and rigorous evaluation. So think about that. And also, the last thing that I see here a lot is the follow up on our issues is limited at times. I would also kind of slide in here. We don't thoroughly evaluate all issues that are noted. We consider them slight hiccups when we're doing these internal audits, and we don't initiate an appropriate corrective action or correction or preventative action program in place. So be sure that you're looking at this as you go forward and avoid these errors as you're modifying for Edition 9. Now, before I get to the next slide, the one thing that I would say that we're going to talk about is we're going to put these in 3 buckets. We're going to talk about planning your audit, executing your audit, And then we're going to be talking about our post audit activities. So that's how we're going to review things as we're moving forward. Before we get to that, I'm going to kind of see if Tammy wants to chime in and if she's got any common errors that she would like to share as well.
I was preparing for the webinar, I took a look at those nonconformances that we saw over the last year, and what the evidence was presented, and just to look at several of those, it talked about just not having a program. So a lot of times we are very good, sites are very focused on doing the module 11 stuff. They're looking at those good manufacturing practices, and they're auditing their facility and looking for things that would fall under module 9. So I'm sorry, module 11. But then they forget about module 2. So in order to meet the requirement for internal audit, you need to look at the entire system, including all of those requirements under module 2 as well. Another common error I see is the lack of training. So, that is required. Your internal auditors need to be trained. We don't specify the type of training. We don't specify that it has to be external training. We just say they have to be trained. And as Chris mentioned, you should be getting everybody involved in that. So I like to see internal audit teams that reach beyond the quality department. It should be those individuals in production. There should be those individuals in materials or scheduling that should be involved in that as well, because as a reminder, you're not supposed to audit your own work. So I saw several nonconformances for the SQF practitioner did the entire internal audit. And so that's not the intent of the code. The quality manager or the SQF practitioner really should be the least amount of auditing in internal auditing, because that person typically has responsibility for the majority of the code. So how can they audit something that they have responsibility for? So that's just a few of the things that I noticed and picked up on as I was looking through those non-conformances.
No, it's great information, Tammy. And shameless plug time. You talked about the training area. It'd be great to always find out a trusted training center potentially to help you out with internal audits, to help you setting up your system. And BV definitely is one of those trusted training centers to look at. But again, as Tammy states, want to point out formal internal auditor training is not necessarily required, although is always a great asset and a great tool to look at. I'll add on, and Tammy, please chime in after I kind of add this point about the training side of things. I find a key gap when it comes into the internal training that is done, as it does not cover the site specific procedures and how to do evaluations and how issues or deficiencies are to be handled. You tend to see that as well as we go through when you find that training gap that exists. Not just training is not done, it's that it isn't effective for that specific site.
Right. I would agree with that. So when I look at training and internal audit team, I really look at the two pieces of it. So are they trained to understand the code? So what are the requirements? You've got module 2, and then you'll have a GMP or GAP module that goes along with it. So there's that piece to it. But the piece that I see missing a lot is training people how to be auditors, how to conduct interviews, how to ask the right questions. Because really, your internal audit, and I think you're going to touch on this, is just another piece that looks like what an external audit should look like. So it's kind of a mini external audit, if you will. So those auditors, those internal auditors, need to be trained in how to conduct a system audit, just as much as our SQF external auditors are trained. So I think that's the piece that people miss a lot, is training internal auditors how to audit, and not just, as you said, check the boxes on a checklist.
No, great points. And I think this will be great for everybody on this call and everybody listen later, that to pull that information off and improve those programs. Will definitely help out and get a more effective system to raise those scores and ensuring that you have a more robust system to prevent those food safety and food quality issues. So let's move on into the first bucket that I was talking about and planning your audit. So what does the code state? So the code states clear, it just says it needs to be conducted in full and at least annually. So remember when I talked about it's scheduled as a once a year activity. Now, I know some sites have challenges. We use consultants as our internal auditors at points, and it's difficult to schedule. Completely understand that. But do look at what makes the most sense for your facility and your ability to have a robust food safety and quality management system. So, what this means is you may audit activities more than once a year. You may be doing internal audit activities spread out over the year. What does that allow? Sometimes that will allow us to have a much more rigorous internal audit, as we will be laser focused on the area that we are evaluating and not worried about, I have to get all of, as Cami pointed out, module 2 and module 11, 12, 9, 13, whatnot. That's the PRP add-on. So you're able to clearly focus on, do those deep dive ins and really peel the onion back to get in there and find out what's going on that end. So on your end, I would say you've got an action point that we need to look at. We need to look at how can we ensure our internal audit activity is spread out over the year for a robust system to be done. And how we would do that is we need to look at the risks of those particular areas that need to be evaluated within the SQF code for food safety and quality, but also look at the systems at our facility as it's designed. Now, when I'm talking risk, do not think risk means only risk to products. Yes, that is the second bullet point in here, but we are auditing compliance to a system being implemented. So you want to be looking at, what is the potential risk of breakdown occurring? Has this occurred in the past? Do we know that this has a propensity to break down? There's a lot of hands touching it, so there could be issues with breakdown. Look at that risk and evaluate, do I need to evaluate these particular areas within my food safety or quality management system more frequently than once a year? Look at the risk to products as well. If there is a breakdown, what happens is, if there is a breakdown, does that mean that I could end up all the way going to a serious event and having a recall, or God forbid, somebody gets sick and ill? Take a look at that and see if that occurs. And maybe that means you're going to need to evaluate those programs a little bit more regularly than just the once a year quick little activity. Do you have a history of issues at the site? Do you have a history, if you are doing those monthly inspections at points that we talk about, or regular inspections of your facility that we talk about within the code as well? Do you see that there's breakdowns in areas at that point that shows we have issues that we need to peel back the onion even further and dig into there? Really carve out that stuff that's causing issues and redefine it and redesign it. Do we have issues within the facility for a breakdown? Is that a problem as well? So is there a history of those issues at your facility and at your site? Sorry for the double bullet point there. Then finally, changes within your systems. If you look at, anytime you put a change in, there's always sometimes a little bit of a lag phase of people adopting it or understanding what needs to be done. And we do have changes occurring now. Remember, May 24th. What's happening? Every audit is to Edition 9. We are currently sitting in the middle of March. We should already be going. We should already have our updates in place. Though those code updates have been put in place, change documents. So we're going to be talking about some 3 key things we need to look at down the road to look at that. And these may be items that we need to evaluate more frequently going forward because of the risk of non-compliance that could exist. Do we have other changes that could occur because of customer demand or corporate requirements, or even just changes that we made because we knew it would be more effective if we put it in this way? So make sure that you look at that. So that's within our planning stage of things. Are executing the audit. So let's see, SQF Edition 9 states we need to have objective evidence that is recorded to verify compliance and or non-compliance. So I already talked about one of those weak points that I've seen in the past is a lack of information that we do see when it comes to compliance as we're going forward. So what I'm telling you, what we need to look at is those internal training documents that we do for training our auditors and what we have written down as part of our internal audit programs. How do we record the records of this activity that's been done to ensure that we can provide confidence to any stakeholder within our facility, within our company that looks at this to show that we did a thorough, rigorous evaluation of the different parameters within this food safety and quality management system. So we want to be detailing what did we look at? What areas? Where did we go? What records did we review? How did we pull those records? What personnel did we interview? Did we observe any good practices? Are these things that we can highlight within there? What can we do on that? And making sure that we are documenting that. We need to show that this is being done. Now, here is your action point as you're moving forward. You need to make sure what you're looking at. You look at your audit tool. How are we recording our audit results? So remember, the SQF code does talk about using an SQF checklist, using the SQF audit tool or a similar audit tool. If we're using that, how are we recording our evidence? What are we doing on that front? Now, the other key point, and I would say this is even more important than looking at your audit tool, is looking at how you are conducting your internal audits. Tammy made reference to this being like an SQF, like an external audit. The external auditor is coming in. I am calling on all of you to be the SQF auditor here. Take off your hat. You do not work at the site now. You do not make assumptions anymore. We are now the SQF auditor. You may know the answer. You now don't know it. You need to see other individuals know this answer. How do we pull those records? I strongly suggest all of you start looking at using a traceability challenge as part of your record pull, regardless of the audit activity. 2 to 5 months, maybe 6 months back, grab a product, a complex product within your process, and then pull everything in there depending on how it would be evaluated and see if those records line up and you can show within there. That gives you confidence that the system is effectively implemented. This is the method in which I conduct my audits. This is the method in which we have told all of our Bureau Veritas certification North American auditors, this needs to be done during your audit. You need to do a traceability challenge, follow those breadcrumbs, see what's going on, document the information. Also, as I said, look at seeing if you want to break up those activities. Not saying you are not permitted to do one audit activity a year, but to have a more robust and thorough internal audit, you may want to be looking at having activities that are spread out more often throughout the year. Maybe you're going to be evaluating your HACCP food safety plan 4 times a year, because if compliance doesn't occur, we got a big problem. Maybe we want to be looking at things like allergen control, number one reason for recalls. We want to be doing that more frequently. Maybe we need to be looking at those things. And remember, document, document, document. We want to have a nice, robust report. Not saying it has to be a nice War and Peace novel, but have those bullet points, have that evidence gathered. Write down those lock codes, write down those dates and numbers, write down those names of people that you've interviewed to show compliance. Make sure you're keeping that. That builds confidence in the system. And then finally, after the audit, so what is our SQF Edition 9 states? It states that we need to have our corrective and preventative actions for the deficiencies that were identified during our individual audits. They need to be documented, and we need to make sure that we're communicating those to relevant personnel. So this is a gap that I tend to see at points. I see that people do an internal audit and our senior leadership or other relevant personnel are not clearly aware of how they need to implement changes or what exactly the issues were. They just know quality's taking care of it. Non-conformance, put it in the quality, put it in our corrective action system, and we'll get to it. We need to communicate these things. They can show that maybe we need more resources, maybe we need more personnel, which is a section of resources. Maybe we need to do a change in how we're doing things, and that change needs to come from senior leadership to funnel down. So make sure that that is being communicated on that end. So you need to also ensure that you are documenting those actions appropriately. You need to make sure that they are effective. You're verifying the corrective actions as well. This is a key gap. I'll tell you another key gap that we see. I've said that a few times, but I tend to see that our corrective actions, we don't do a very good job in how we follow up. And all that I see a follow up sometimes is a pair of initials in a box that says verified by. But what was the date of verification? Was it just verified on the date that it was put in place? Did you go back a week, 2 weeks, 1 month later and do a verification? Did you go back in a month as part of an audit and just audit all the corrective actions that were implemented as part of that internal audit that was done? Maybe something we need to think about and how we can ensure that we're moving it forward and ensure looking at how we're communicating those as well. Already brought that up, but making sure you're communicating those. So your action point going forward, what you need to look at is what you're doing is look at how you are documenting these results. How are we writing everything down to ensure that we capture these requirements for corrective and preventative actions? And how are we communicating the information to stakeholders and also senior leadership? So do we just share a checklist? Do we only share the corrective actions? Is it an email? What is it that we are doing? So I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent here for a second. I did something ages ago when I first came into this industry called a DISC profile, and tends to find that a lot of senior leadership are very big in the D section of a DISC profile, the dominant section. And they tend to want very short pieces of information. Give us the key information that's needed. So maybe we need to reevaluate how we're communicating our findings and putting an executive summary of results in place that highlight the positives and the negatives, and we bring it together and communicate it. I have seen this at sites, and this has been extremely, extremely effective to communicate findings from internal audits to plant management personnel, to corporate personnel, but also this has been very, very good to get buy-in for all departments across the board. It is a lot easier to read a small paragraph that details everything that was done instead of an email that says, see attached audit report results, and it's a 15-page checklist that doesn't really tell them much because they don't know all departments. That may allow you to have more buy-in across the group and help change the culture. Oh, I've said that word twice now. Keep an eye on that. Change the culture within our group going forward. And then also look at how can we manage those corrective action reports? How are we making sure that we are documenting those things? Make sure that you look at that. Make sure as well, you, after your audit, when you are done your audit activity, you reevaluate the internal audit program to see if you need to do any updates to it. This is missed a lot. I will tell you right now, my ears always perk up when I look at an internal audit and I'm at a site and I get to that point in the audit and I'm looking at it. I've already got 6 nonconformities or 4 nonconformities, and the site says we haven't had an internal nonconformity for internal audit in 10 years. Makes me wonder, is your program thorough enough? Are you getting the intended output? So look at that. So a quick recap of those action steps that we need to look at. Look at your risk. Look at the risks to your systems. Look at the risk to the products. Look at the risk to failure to see, do I need to do more than once a year? Look at that so it can be more robust. What else do we need to do? Reevaluate those methods in what we're doing. Make sure the code requires it now. We need to document compliance. Make sure we are effectively documented. How did you evaluate that? Make sure it's clear. Also make sure that those non-conformances or those non-compliances are clear as well and easily understood. Look at how you are capturing those evaluations. What tools are you using? What information are you using on that end? And remember, within these internal audits, you are the SQF auditor. You are the investigator. Get that flashlight out. Get those digging in. Dig in there. Peel that onion out. Get going on that front. Then finally, ensure that you have effective follow-up. Make sure that you are clearly resolving those issues and you are ensuring compliance. Ensuring compliance, you're verifying that those corrective actions or those preventative actions are effective. They are meeting the intended outputs. And be sure to look at reevaluating the way you communicate your results. Do we need to trim our information down to get more buy-in across the board? So I know that's a bit to take away, but basically look at those things and see how that can make your internal audit system even better or more robust. Now, before I kind of hand this back off to Tammy, I'll get Tammy to kind of pull in and see if she has any other action steps she thinks you should add to your internal audit programs.
Yeah, Chris. So be the SQF auditor. I just love that statement because it really just sums up and kind of drives the whole point of an internal audit program. To just brings it all together. So one thing that I was going to mention is I love to see how the code interacts with each other. And so we talked about internal audits today, and you talked about communicating those results. Well, for those of you that may be thinking, hey, management review, it's a requirement of management review that you communicate those internal audit results to your leadership team or your senior site management. So, figure out the best way to do that, and it just really will bring home your management review as well when you're covering off those internal audit findings, as Chris said, that you should be having. I too get a little leery when I see an internal audit program that has had no findings or nonconformances for years. That to me is showing that you probably have an ineffective internal audit program, especially if your SQF auditor is coming in and finding those nonconformances for you. So again, just be the SQF auditor. I love that statement.
Awesome. So part of this, we kind of mentioned it, that there are some key updates. There's a nice document of changes that we can look at. Tammy's now going to take us through these 3 key changes we need to look at. The Tammy top 3, I think, is what we're going to call them. And it's a bit of a cultural shift potentially. So a wink, wink, nudge, nudge as to what potentially the first topic is. So Tammy, I'll let you take it away, and the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Chris. So yeah, we are going to look at what I've called, Tammy's top 3. So as Chris mentioned, culture many times. Food safety culture is one of the changes for Edition 9 that we've had so many questions and so many comments about, especially during the public comment period about food safety culture. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what's my auditor going to look for, and so I'm going to go through that. But right now, I just want to kind of give you a summary. We did add food safety culture to the policy statement, so 2.1.1.1, and then we totally added 2.1.1.2, and that's the requirement to lead and support a food safety culture. The highlights there, I'm not going to read the code to you, but within that section or that clause there, it talks about objectives and performance measures, having them, communicating them, making sure people understand them, having those adequate resources to support your food safety program, adoption and maintenance of a food safety system, and then also your employees. So those last 3 bullet points there talk about your employees. They have to be informed and accountable, encouraged and required to report issues, and they must also be empowered. So that's kind of the highlights of food safety culture. One of the things that we do when we're training food safety auditors here at SQFI is we take them to Rio. So I wanted to go to Rio for food safety culture, and hopefully that will answer that frequently asked question on what's my auditor going to be looking for to determine whether I meet a food safety culture or not. So Rio stands for records, interviews, observation. So I broke it down here into those 3. So for records, obviously objectives and performance measures, it's mentioned in the code. You have to have them. You have to communicate those. You have to let people know how they're performing. So that's a record we'd be looking for. An organization chart. That will speak to those resources. Do you have enough people to support your food safety program? And so an org chart is a good record to look at. Capital project plan. That also talks to resources from a money perspective. So is the company investing in that site. And so I always showed our auditor our capital project plan because I always had several projects on there that spoke to improving our food safety program. Internal audit report, we spent a lot of time on that today. You need to have that in place and be able to show your auditor, and show them that you do have that cross-functional team. And it's more than just that food safety practitioner who's conducting your internal audit, or your quality department conducting that internal audit. Your GMP audit reports, facility inspections, you may call them. So having those reports to look at. Recognition programs. So, how do you recognize people when they do a good job? And, I always like to do that when we had group meetings about once a quarter. And I would say, hey, this person or this group or this shift are doing a fantastic job at supporting the food safety program. So recognition is very important. The disciplinary process, that's one that some people kind of question sometime, but within the code, it talks about holding people accountable. And so that's what I mean by the disciplinary process. How do you hold your employees accountable when they don't have that food safety culture and they're not doing those things that they should be? And so food safety quality records, are they, filling them out? Are they complete? Items like that to look at. Training records, obviously very important, to make sure people are trained. And then the job descriptions, and how are they supported, and what do you have when someone's absent and needs to have a backup. So having those types of records in place. Some of the things: pest sighting logs, trailer inspections, foreign material findings, glass and brittle plastic breakage reports. If I have a site that tells me their pest sighting log has been blank for a year, I'm going, really? They haven't seen anything. That speaks to food safety culture. Are people empowered to speak up? Are they encouraged to report issues? Same thing with trailer inspections. Have you never had a trailer rejected because it smelled, or because there were pests in it, or because there was a hole in the side of the wall? So looking at those types of things are very important to food safety culture and determining if you have it or not. I always sum up food safety culture as people doing the right thing, even if they think nobody is watching. And so that gets into your observations there. So is the company transparent? Do people appear rushed? Are they completing tasks above the minimum requirements? I've seen, where you might have a requirement that says, they have to sweep up their area at the end of the shift. But do you see people, doing those tasks more often than just the end of the shift? So that speaks to culture. Do employees seem hesitant to answer your questions, maybe because they don't know, or because they don't want to be truthful about something they're saying? So, is that an issue that you see from observation? Do you see personnel pick up trash off the floor, or do they walk by it? That's one thing that, just walking across the plant floor, you can observe. Are people picking things up? Are they putting things away? So observations are key there. Now let's talk about interviews, the one in the middle. That's a big one. And I had someone who heard me talk about interviews the other day, and they sent me a question this morning. Hey, how many interviews do you think we should, conduct for food safety culture? Well, there's not a set number, but you should do enough interviews that, it gives you a good indication on whether there's an appropriate food safety culture or not. So some of the questions that you could ask as internal auditors, being the SQF auditor, or some of the things that you anticipate your SQF auditor may ask you. Are you meeting your food safety objectives? How do you know that? Do you ever need help with everything? Who's your backup? Would you feel safe feeding your product to your family? And, that was one thing that was always very important to me. I have children, I have grandchildren. Do I feel safe feeding the product that we're making to my family? And I could always answer yes to that question, honestly. So what happens if somebody violates a procedure? there should be an indication. People should understand what that process looks like. And then, I always like explain a time when you told management about a food safety issue and what was their response. So those are just a few of the questions. Is there anything, Chris, that you can think of to add as far as any records you would look at or any questions you would ask?
No, I think you pointed out one of the main things is, do the employees know to do the right thing when no one is watching? Uh, Things that and you point out some great bullet points here about, do you pick up the trash on the floor? Like when I see, if a workspace is cluttered and littered with things all around it that could potentially be contaminant issues or pose problems to sanitation issues, things like that, that makes me kind of wonder. That makes me want to dig a bit more. That gets my ears perked up. One thing I've seen that's been really good within the food safety culture is people sometimes piece that into their KPI process, and they have evaluations, or they have, I guess, surveys that are done every year that are anonymous, that answer some of these interview questions that you're pointing out, that help out to see where they're at if changes need to be made. Sometimes you may not get that information right up front, but yeah, that's what I've seen on that end. And you know what I always like? I'm not perfect when I do audits at points. My hairnet's cockeyed. I love when the employees come up and tell me, "Hey, man, your hairnet's cockeyed." You know what I mean? Make sure you're doing this. Don't forget about that. Not telling you to go and make sure that you're berating your auditors right when they walk on the floor, but that does show that there's this real drive forward on that front. So those are some really great points, and I think will really help out the people that are on the call to make that food safety culture adopted really well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember one time where I got yelled at by several employees. I was in a hurry. I needed to get something to shipping. And so I threw on my hard hat. I washed my hands and went running out onto the plant floor. And I hadn't made it 10 feet when I hear three different people yell, "Tammy, you forgot your hairnet." So the fact that they felt comfortable saying, "Hey, food safety practitioner, you forgot your hairnet," to me speaks to food safety culture. The fact that they would point out that I forgot even to do that just says a lot to me. So yeah, for me, food safety culture has always been there, and it was always inherent in the code. But now we're just calling it out specifically. So here we go. So top two internal audits or internal labs. I'm sorry, we've talked about internal audits today. So internal labs. So the key changes. I did put the code requirement there. Again, I'm not going to read it to you. I did bold the section where it's new, where internal labs are used to conduct input, environmental or product analysis, sampling, and testing methods shall be in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO IEC 17025. So that's the new part of that code. And a lot of people have asked me, what does it mean in accordance with? And so, some of the things that I have mentioned was, just making sure that you have those good lab practices, making sure you have procedures in place and documented test methods and training, making sure you're keeping records of your analysis, having that sampling plan, and proficiency testing. So, including annual proficiency testing. That part's not new. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking to you about proficiency testing, because even though it's not new for edition 9, we did add in a new definition for edition 9 for proficiency testing, just because this is really, I think, probably the most misunderstood requirement in the code. So let's talk about proficiency testing. So I have a definition there. Again, if you haven't checked out the glossary, Appendix 2 for the code, I would so encourage you to do it. There are a lot of definitions there, and we added in this one for edition 9. So proficiency testing, I've underlined some things. Interlab comparison, calibrates the performance. Those who conduct micro, chemical, or physical analysis, you should recognize those: biological, chemical, or physical. Hopefully you immediately go, "Oh, hey, those are in HACCP. So analysis of ingredients, materials, work in progress, finished products, and the processing environment. So that's what proficiency testing is. For any of you that have heard me speak about root cause analysis before, you know that I love a good is not matrix. To me, when you're doing problem solving and root cause analysis, using is and is not matrices can really help you see through the weeds to get to the actual problem, or in this case, the requirement. So I've done an is not matrix. So proficiency testing is not training. So I look through a lot of audit reports and I see all of your corrective actions. So many times, a site that gets a nonconformance in proficiency testing, their corrective action is, well, I did training. And unfortunately, we're seeing that as an accepted corrective action. But proficiency testing is not training. What it is calibration. So you're calibrating your personnel to another lab. And so that gets to the second line. It's not an intra-lab comparison. So you're not comparing employee A to employee B to employee C to make sure they're getting the same results. You're comparing your lab to other labs. So it's an inter-laboratory comparison. So that's what proficiency testing is. What it's not is product quality testing or sensory. So I see, several auditors that are actually providing evidence for this nonconformance as there was no proficiency testing for sensory. Well, I'm pretty certain there's not anybody out there doing sensory for food safety, because proficiency testing is not in the quality code. It's only in the food safety code. So it's not required for quality testing, and sensory would be identified as quality testing. It is for food safety testing, and it could be product or environmental. The last line there, conducted for testing sent to a third party. That's what it's not. So I see so many nonconformances for sites who didn't do proficiency testing for the people that are swabbing for their environmental program. Well, the site's taking those swabs and they're sending it out to a third party. So you would not need to do proficiency testing for those people that are, gathering the swabs, because they're not actually doing the test. Now, the third party lab that you send those swabs to that are doing the test, they would be required to have proficiency testing as a part of their ISO 17025 accreditation, but not you. Now, are your swabbers required to be trained? Absolutely. They should be trained on how to properly swab. But again, proficiency testing is not training. Okay. But proficiency testing is conducted for testing completed on site. So whatever food safety testing, let me give you an example. I worked at a site where, our kill step, in order to confirm that, we would do water activity testing. So that's a test that we had to have proficiency testing on. So that was our food safety testing that we did on site. And so, our most frequently asked question is, where do I get proficiency testing from then? And so one thing I just want to say to that, utilize your resources. The company you purchase your test equipment from, or a third-party lab that you utilize, those are great resources to call up and say, hey, do you know of anybody that provides proficiency testing for water activity? Or, if you are doing your environmental testing on site and you are looking for, salmonella. So, calling up the test equipment provider, or, a third party lab that you do utilize, they might give you an idea. Or, check out the internet. I was on last week and it took me less than a minute to find a list of 50 companies that provided proficiency testing for food safety. So, what I did, I went to an accreditation body website that accredits labs to ISO 17025, and they had a handy dandy little search function where I could put in proficiency testing, and it gave me that list of 50 companies that they have accredited to conduct proficiency testing. So, just do your homework, do some research. You should be able to find it. So Any more to add there, Chris? What do you see as an auditor when it comes to understanding proficiency testing?
No, I think you put it in good there, that you talked about ensuring that you're looking at that interlaboratory comparison and that you're focused on food safety side of things. You know, I think most people, if they have a lab on site, especially if they're doing micro testing and whatnot, they do understand proficiency to a certain area. But I think the code did a very good job on edition 9 and expanding it. And this explanation has really helped people out to understand what is meant as to what we need going forward on that end. But yeah, some very good points about the quality code as well, because sensory is quite the funny one that you see in there. So we calibrated those taste buds. So,
All right. So then my third of my top three there, let's talk about labels. So, we've got some new requirements and we've got some not new requirements. So I just want to kind of highlight those. So 2.3.2.7 is not new. Finished product labels. Accurate, comply with legislation, and approved by qualified company personnel. That's not new. That was in edition 8.1. 6.1.2, we've got some not new and some new. So not new is that you should have startup changeovers documented, implemented, and part of that is ensuring the correct product is in the correct package and with the correct label. That's not a new requirement, always been there. So the new requirement, however, is ensure that label use is reconciled and any inconsistencies investigated and resolved, and records shall be maintained. And I'm going to expand on that in just a minute. 2.8.1.9, following in that allergen management program, it talks about finished product labels, again, have to be accurate and must be true with regards to allergens. And I like that section because it actually gives you some possibilities there. So it says it may include label approval at receipt, label reconciliations during production. That was always there. It just wasn't highlighted like we highlighted it in 2.6.1.2. Destruction of obsolete labels, verification of labels on finished product, and product changeover procedures. So let's dig deep into that reconciliation piece of it on this next slide. Okay, so my most frequently asked questions on labels. What does label reconciliation mean? And do I have to hand count every label? There are some panicked people out there thinking that they have to hand count every label. Well, what I encourage you to do is to determine, what label reconciliation means. So, just a quick search to find reconcile, resolving the differences between or comparing two sets of records to check for agreement. So that's what reconciliation is. So what I would encourage you to do is define your method of reconciliation. If it's hand counting, sure, it's hand counting. That might be your method. But for a lot of us, hand counting would not be appropriate. So maybe it's cycle counting, maybe it's weigh counting. There could be lots of possibilities for label reconciliation. Just define your method. Number two, demonstrate that your method will identify inconsistencies. Again, anytime I see somebody say, oh, we never have a problem of reconciling our labels, then I would question whether your method is doing a good job of identifying those inconsistencies, especially if you've had internal or external nonconformances from your customers where you've had mislabeled product and things like that. And then number three, determine how you resolve the inconsistencies and show proof through your records. So if you do those three things, then you should have that label reconciliation requirement in the bag. You should, be able to show that you have a good program there and that you meet the requirements. So yeah, so that's my top three for edition 9. So Chris, I'm going to send it back to you to wrap us up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tammy. That was great. Now, I would say as well on the label side, and not just on the reconciliation area, is remember what our number one reason for recalls is. Number one reason for recalls is typically allergens and linked to allergen labeling, which could also be wrong product in wrong package, right? So how are we evaluating, and make sure that you're controlling your system much more effectively on that end? And how do you prevent inadvertent labels from being used? So again, we are doing a reconciliation to know where everything's, but do we prevent having a potential issue when we get to that reconciliation stage? So make sure that you're looking at your system, and we're trying to be less reactive and more proactive as we're going forward. I don't know if you agree sort of on that side on those things, Tammy, with that. We're just adding in. I know it's we're looking at the reconciliation, but we want to make it as easy as possible to see that we don't have those gaps by having those systems effectively implemented ahead of time.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, the number one reason last year for recalls for SQF certified sites was around those undeclared allergens. And, that was really the driver for, beefing up the code around label reconciliation. And the primary cause for those recalls coming back to issues with the labels, putting the right product in the right label. So yeah, I would agree with what you said.
Sounds like a potential high risk item within your system that may need to be internally audited more frequently than once a year.